This man is retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend, U.S. Air Force, and former head of Project Bluebook. Friend, now on the management staff of Celestial Industries Incorporated, which builds and launches missiles for defense testing purposes. Friend now relates this most unusual experience.
It was 1959 when I was invited to attend a briefing in the security portion of this building. It seems a retired Rear Admiral had information about a woman in Upper Maine that purported to have established contact with extraterrestrial beings. 2 Naval Intelligence officers were sent to investigate. The naval officers met with the woman, and she went into a trance, supposedly to establish contact with the purported extraterrestrials. And then they asked her scientific and technical questions that a woman of her education could not possibly know the answers to. Yet, as the questions were put to her, she was able to answer easily with seeming telepathic help from these purported extraterrestrials. According to the report, she indicated there was an organization, OEEV, which meant Universal Association of Planets, and that organization had a project, UNZA, meaning Earth, which was being conducted. Then an unexpected turn took place. One of the naval officers was informed by the woman that they, the extraterrestrials, were willing to answer questions directly through him, a naval commander and intelligence officer with no prior experience in telepathic communication. He took over and attempted to write down the answers to questions put to him by his fellow naval officer. Questions were put to him such as, do you favor the government, religious group, or race? And would there be a third world war? The answer to both was no. The group then asked if they could see a spaceship, and the commander, still in a trance, told them to go to the window and they would have proof. The group moved to the window where they supposedly observed a UFO. I was told that a call was made for radar confirmation. The reply came back that that particular quadrant of the area was blanked out on radar at the time. After being briefed on all of the details, I asked the commander if he would attempt to contact me. He sat for several minutes and then appeared in a deep trance with his Adam's apple moving up and down rapidly. Questions were put to him, and he answered them by printing in rather large letters using rapid but jerky motions. It wasn't at all like his natural hand. During the course of the questioning, we learned the names of some of the so-called extraterrestrials. One was Crill, C-R-L-L-L. Another, Alomar, A-L-O-M-A-R. And another, Affa, A-F-F-A, purportedly from the planet Uranus.
A case that just as well could have been written by a very imaginative science fiction writer. But here in my hand is the actual account of the incident by one of the agents present at that time. The names of 7 men present are listed here. Because of the unusual nature of the incident and at their request, their names will remain confidential.
Off camera, Grant, we were chatting a bit about Frances Swan and the Betty Hill connection.
It's a bizarre story. Yeah, this is one of the more interesting stories, and this has actually been documented. So what happens is this sort of synchronicity where Betty Hill, who is when the Greys start, the blondes, the humans all stop in about the time when Betty Hill comes on, and then suddenly everybody turns to Greys.
No one was talking about Greys before.
No.
That's right.
And after Betty Hill, it was really all the contactees from the 1950s just sort of faded away. I mean, they just sort of like, they never happened. So I always said seemed to be this connection between Frances Swan, who was the last of the contactee things, and the beginning of the Greys with Betty Hill. And then I discovered they lived like down the street from each other. And people said it wasn't down the street, but it was pretty close.
Could you do a little bit of a background on Frances Swan?
Well, okay, yeah, so Frances Swan was the main psychic that was being used by CIA, Naval Intelligence, Canadian government. Everybody was in contact with this woman because everybody believed that this woman was in contact with something. She had some information. They could pull this information.
She was a clairvoyant.
She was just a woman who suddenly started to channel. She may have had some psychic stuff before, but she just suddenly, in 1953 had this encounter where she meets this guy, and then suddenly this noise is in her ear. She starts getting these messages from Affa and Ponnar, who are flying these two big giant spacecrafts around the Earth. And this is how it starts with her. And so that's 1954. And then 61, Betty Hill is in Canada. And I think she even had contact with the Smiths. So she's coming back, and she gets abducted. And she goes, she lives in, Frances Swan is in Elliott, Maine. And on the other side of the river is New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where Betty Hill lives. So they're very close. So when Betty got abducted, then the story I heard was they went to Nightcap and they told Kehoe. Kehoe said, "Come on, the aliens are grabbing people off a road, like, get out of here." He used to fight. There was a story that he would fight with Smith. I don't believe it. You got this contact, you're talking to aliens, this is all, contactees are all hoaxers, it's all garbage. He was in a real nuts and bolts guy. It was just like, you know, let's get this thing, but they weren't making any contact, and they definitely weren't abducting people. So they didn't really want to deal with Betty Hill, and so Admiral Knowles, who was on the Nightcap board, as was Wilbur Smith, said, "Oh, I'll take you, this Frances Swan woman, she's talking to aliens. I'll take you, and you can talk to her. She'll tell you what's going on. What happened to you?" So they take her, this is the story I heard, they take Betty Hill over to Frances Swan's place, and she starts telling their story, and she mentions these Greys. And they took me, and Frances goes, "Greys? Greys? You were talking to Greys? They're the evil ones." And so she basically didn't want to talk to her anymore. Just basically leave. I'm not going to talk to you. And so there's other people coming, and the story I wanted to link to you is this one. So 54.
And she say that she had to leave the house. She got really upset at Betty, and she said
she told Betty to get out of the house.
Wow. Because
you're dealing with the evil ones. I'm dealing with the gods are the Affa and his boys are from God, and yours are demons. Well, the same debate that's going on now. Your demons, get out of here. I'm not going to talk to you. So in 54, Navy Intelligence gets involved, and they hear about through Knowles is an admiral in the Navy, so he's pushing the story that this woman's got this contact. So these two Navy Intelligence guys go and visit her. The SB, who's the head of Navy Intelligence, sends these two guys to go and talk to Frances Swan in Elliott. So they fly up to Elliott and they talk to her, and they say, "Yeah, it's got this weird thing. She's doing this automatic writing and talking to these aliens and giving answers to questions and stuff like that." And then not much happens till 1959, and then for some reason these Navy Intelligence guys fly back to Maine, apparently to get flight time for their flight license or something. That was the excuse they used for going up there. And it was at that point when Frances Swan says these two guys are all interested. "Do this channeling, talk to her, ask them this." She says, "Well, why don't I just show you how to do it?" And the guy goes, "Oh, you can do that?" She said, "Yeah, sit down." So she puts her hand on his right shoulder, and suddenly it's like, his hand starts doing that automatic writing. And he gets really excited. And he's like, "Holy cow, I'm talking to this Affa guy now." So they go racing back from Elliott, Maine, back to Washington, D.C., and they go to the National Photographic Interpretation Center. So this is one of the most top secret CIA buildings in Washington. This is where they analyzed all the U-2, all the SR-71, and all the spy photographs. This is where they took it. And there was a joke, it was in the most rundown part of Washington, above this car dealership. And that all the poor people that lived around there thought that this is where they were printing money. The government was printing money. Because there was so much security around the building. And they go, "What's they securing this car dealership thing for?" And they had this thing, and that's why they hid it there. That's the last place the Russians would look for, this top secret building where they were analyzing all these films. The guy that ran it was Arthur Lundell. So now you have Ron Pandolfi, who's, now I think there's a guy after Ron Pandolfi. I've actually seen the guy's photograph, but there's a guy after Ron Pandolfi, but Ron Pandolfi ran the Weird Desk. He was hired by Kit Green, who ran the Weird Desk till '83, and before Kit Green ran the Weird Desk was Arthur Lundell. So Arthur Lundell, and we actually, when Dest and I were in Tucson, his files were there, the correspondence between James McDonald and Arthur Lundell.
Oh, yeah.
Because Lundell was heavily into UFOs, and he would basically say the same thing you're saying now. We really don't know what's going on, but it's a really interesting subject.
McDonald had a lot of files too.
Yeah, but it was really, like, he had real hard handwriting, little tiny handwriting. It was very hard to read. I don't know how many cases. There was like 135 cases. I mean, you'd be there for months to try to go through all that stuff. And so that's what we were doing when you're doing it. You're trying to figure out like which files should we be looking at. And Dexter got lucky with this metal thing. We're just sort of looking at file boxes and what's in the file boxes and trying to guess which one we should take because we were only there for a couple of hours. And so Arthur Lundahl ran the National Photographic Interpretation Center. So these two guys, the one worked for him, CIA and Navy, worked CIA and Navy. So he goes back and he says, Arthur, she taught me how to do this channeling thing. I'm talking to this Affa. And he said, hey, okay, great. Sit down, let's talk to Affa. So they sit him down in the National Photographic Interpretation Center, and he starts to do this channeling thing. And Art Lundahl is running the whole thing. He's asking the questions. And they have these CIA guys in there, and he says, you know, there's actually the transcript. It's asked him, like, is there going to be a Third World War? Is, you know, Roman Catholics the prime religion? And all these weird questions they're asking, and Affa's answering or whatever. And then Art Lundahl says, we'd like some proof that you are for real. And then Affa, this guy, changes from automatic writing to voice. He says, what do you want? Art Lundahl said, we'd like you to show yourself. He said, when? Now. Go to the window. And so he'd go to the window, and over top of the Capitol, it's flying saucer in the middle of the day, it was flying by the window, over top of the Capitol. And then in '75, so I'm friends with Bob Emenegger, who did the documentary UFOs Past, Present, Future, which was later done as UFOs It Has Begun in 1979. And then in 1983, they came back and said, oh, the government liked what you did in the 1970s. They'd like you to do another documentary. And they wanted Valet and they wanted Hynek to be involved. And they didn't want to get involved, so the whole thing fell apart. They realized it was going to be a scam. They were going to get stuck into this thing. And they would pull the film at the last minute, because that was the whole Holloman Air Force Base film. So Lundahl comes to Bob Emenegger, and he says, oh, we got this story we'd like you to put in. You got to remember, like, this story nobody knew. This story about the channeling of this alien at the National Photographic Interpretation Center. And so Emenegger was actually in Washington. He actually was in the building. And then he said to Art, he says, well, it's an interesting story. I mean, this, you know, channeling and stuff. And they actually gave him a handwritten version of the memo that was written for it. That was written by Friend, I think. It was kind of confusing how it was written, but it was a handwritten. So it's not the actual document. It was a handwritten 11-page document, which we actually put in the book. We put part of this, 3 pages of this document in the book about this channeling thing. Because the whole 11 pages would just take up a lot. So anyway, we put in 3 pages. And then so Bob Emenegger says to him, well, so you're going to go on camera and tell us a story? He says, no, I can't go on camera. He said, well, you got to tell a story. You go on camera. He said, Bob, I can't go on camera. Well, why can't you go on camera? I'm on duty. Still CIA. Still, he was the guy that briefed Kennedy. He's the guy that went in.
This is Lundahl?
Yeah, Lundahl. When Kennedy did the whole thing with the Cuban Missile Crisis, they had the guy came in with the photographs that showed the launch tubes and the stuff in Cuba and stuff. It was all U-2 photographs. It was our Lundahl who did the briefing of the president. So he was this high-level guy. And he said, "No, I can't go on camera." So in UFOs Past, Present, Future, they have Robert Friend, who was the head of Bluebook at the time. And Robert Friend goes in and tells this whole story, and he's standing in the room, and he goes and points to the window, and you can actually see the window, and you can see the Capitol in the background. So they did this channeling thing, and then, so I'm talking to Frances Swan, there was a story came out, there was a magazine came out in the 1980s that seemed to be one of these things where you sort of question the guys that were writing the articles, is this the government running this magazine? It was really sort of high-end magazine. It was like weird stories, but like a lot of background stuff where you're thinking, man, these people know something. And the one was about Frances Swan, and it was, this article was done about her and about Larson. I think Larson, I think, was the guy they sat down and learned to channel. And the story was that he'd come back to her, and he had said, I can't get rid of them. They're in my dreams. They're bugging me. And
was this the guy who had the NDE?
No.
No?
No. This is a guy that was showed how to channel. He was the guy that was in the channeling thing at the CIA. But this thing had followed him, and it was haunting him. And she said, I told you. I told you not to deal with them. I told you. And her version was that he was dealing with the Greys. And I warned you, and you would listen to me, and you went on your own, and now you're coming to me to get rid of them, and stuff like this. And this is this whole deal, this story, it goes into the 1980s of this guy being haunted by these beings that had, almost like the hitchhiker thing they're talking about now. He was trying to get rid of them, and I don't know what she did for him, but she would, you know, when I corresponded with her, she really couldn't write. I mean, she had no education at all. She would just,
You reached out to her and you talked to her?
yeah, I'd send her these letters. We did the handwriting at the time, and she would just put something in the margin. And sometimes I couldn't figure. She'd say, "Read your Bible," and the God is a good one, and there's a lot of.
Did she ever mention working with a guy named Gottlieb?
No. No, she didn't volunteer anything. She just answered my questions, and it was very sort of brief. Because she was like a woman that was not high profile, and nobody really knew about her. Like the government was dealing with her quite a bit, and she would correspond with the Smiths. I don't know what happened to a lot of that correspondence, but Kathy Martin has talked about her. That Kathy Martin contacted her daughter and recovered some of the material from the daughter. And there's actually some transcripts that we may get. We've got the actual transcripts from 1954. So if we can get them in a PDF form. And they were sent to me, I think Eric Davis provided them to me. And they're actual transcripts of her channelings in 1954 when the whole thing started. So Knowles...
54 she was channeling?
Oh
yeah, because that's
started in the end of 53 and 54. Shit. So Knowles is the neighbor. So Knowles and his wife go in there and they're transcribing, and they're all just blown away by this woman getting all these messages. So we've got, I'd say, 100 pages. So we may put that in like a book type thing where we just get a PDFs and put them in there. And you can read them. Some of it's pretty goofy. I mean, it's a lot of religious stuff, and some of it seems pretty wild stuff. But it is the actual transcripts from 1954. So there's all these weird things going on behind it. And the interesting thing was that Navy Intelligence, like they said in the FBI, they talked about the Navy Intelligence file. So I actually filed an FOIA to get Frances Swan's Navy Intelligence file. And what you see now is, if you look at Lou Elizondo and stuff, that's all Navy. And the question is, and Bob Lazar said it was all Navy. And when I asked the Smith people, I said, we were always trying to find out who was Smith talking to in the United States? Who was he getting this material from? And then they said, yeah, we think it was Navy. He was talking to these Navy people. And that the whole idea behind that I'm just guessing. But when the UFO thing starts in 1947, there was no U.S. Air Force. There's just the Navy. So the Navy's got all the research money, and it has their own Air Force. They have everything, and so when the UFO thing starts and Roswell happens or whatever, then the Air Force comes along and says, "Oh, we're going to take over the UFOs." No, you're not. We got the research money. We're in charge of this. So it's always this idea that the Navy actually may be the ones that are running the show, and that's where. So you have this Swan thing. You have again this Navy Intelligence was very interested in her, and they had a file on her. And of course, when I said, "No, now we're going to file anything about this." And then what are you going to do? Unless you get a lawyer and you take them to court or whatever. But there was a lot of people that in the background where you saw this stuff going on, but nobody really recorded it. It was sort of lost, and everybody was hiding, the same as now. Like the inner circle people were all sort of hiding. They didn't want to be known who they were or whatever. And I sort of tracked these guys down.
So everyone from Wilbert Smith all the way up to Lundahl, all looking into this lady Frances Swan.
Yeah.
Over what time span?
54 was that's when it all started, when Navy Intelligence got involved with her through Admiral Knowles, when he sent the letter to the President. The FBI files are 54. Then in 59 was this thing. And the other part of the story, to end it, is when they do the channeling thing, this is 59, July of 59, Lundahl's blown away by this. He's just like, wow, that's just cool. So he, top secret, he calls friend, who's head of Bluebook at the time, at Ray Patterson. Need you to come to Washington right now. We got something to show you. So he flies to Washington, and this is 2 days later, and they take him in, and they explain the whole thing, and they sit this guy down, they say, we're talking to this alien here, or whatever. And the guy he goes into trance again, and Affa comes on, and then they go through the whole thing, and then they say, we'd like you to show yourself. And he said, no. He said, the time is not right or something like that. And then, so in the memo that we put in the book, it has the actual FBI, CIA guys' names. There's about 7 CIA people. They actually name them, who they are.
Name them
they're
on,
in this.
on what?
They're in this meeting, the second meeting. So the second meeting is a transcript of a memo as to what happened in meeting number 1, where the thing flies by the window. So meeting number 2, Friend is in there, and Friend handwrites this thing, or somebody handwrites this thing, and it has the whole thing. It's 11 pages. It describes exactly what happened 2 days before, thing flying by the window, who, and in this meeting, Friend is there, and all these CIA guys are in the room, and they're all talking about Lundahl's in the room, and they're discussing what's happened. And they put this guy in trance, and Affa won't show up. He said, no, time's not right. So Friend goes back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we actually have the general. I think we talk about it in the book. He goes to the general, his commanding general, and he said, this was amazing. He said, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in Blue Book. He said the guy's Adam's apple was moving up and down. He said, something was going on here. The guy was in something. And the general says to him, another agency has control of it. Hands off.
Wow.
And that's where it ends.